another episode of Read, Write, Think, and Code with Renee and Sharon. And we are so thrilled to have you back for another discussion around how we can integrate literacy, writing, and STEM and STEAM. We have come together as a team because we found the power in each other's expertise and understanding that Renee has this wonderful, wonderful rapport with reading and writing and being able to break that down and express it in a way that is easy to consume both by educators, parents, and students. And then we leverage a bit of my expertise in talking about STEM and STEAM and computer science and how understanding the basics of reading and writing is what powers you to be a better STEMologist, technologist, and understand science and math. So today we're going to dig into a bit about, oh my goodness, we're doing this virtual learning thing. Here we are. We're virtual learning, we're teaching, we're parenting, we're partnering with community. But how can we really elevate literacy so kids can see that when they're not face-to-face with us, they still can practice their literacy with everyday actions and how that actually is STEAM and STEM. So Renee, when we think about literacy, is it just reading a book?
It's not. That's the good news. That's the good news. We've been thinking a lot about just broadening that definition of creating literacy experiences and really what does it mean to read and write in our everyday lives. And of course, that's what I've been thinking about. But thank goodness through partnerships with my friends like you, you're helping me think about all of those same experiences are also math and science and STEAM and STEM.
Right.
So here's like everyday life experiences become full and vibrant of a lot of learning. And the great thing is that students are experiencing them, we're experiencing them, and it's actually fun. It's actually rather engaging. So one thing to think about, for example, let's just think the idea of playing with blocks or dolls or just creating something. I will out my husband on this. He basically, when my daughter was young, he would say, oh my gosh, I have to play dolls again, until I said, but you know what you're doing? You're actually writing. When you have a character here and a character here and they're working through something or you're building something with blocks, that's writing. And so now he says that's basically his SAT prep. Just kidding. It's not SAT prep.
Well, actually, not too far off. I like where his brain is. Yeah.
But giving kids just time and space to create and to imagine building things with blocks, role playing with dolls or stuffed animals or animals, singing songs, storytelling, things like setting the table, let's go with that one. Let's first think, what's the first thing we need to get? How many people do we have in our family? Okay, we need 4 plates. We're having soup, so we need spoons, we need cups, we need napkins. And basically by just going through the everyday act of setting the table, you're actually, again, writing a procedural text. It might not be pen to paper writing, but you're going through that important, creating of a concept and then going through that step-by-step process.
And you can imagine, and if you're thinking about it like I'm thinking about it, I'm creating that list in my head. Although I'm not physically writing it, I'm writing it in my head, which leads me to pipe in with the STEAM connection to this. So when we think about setting the table, it's exactly what you just said. It's procedural. It's a step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Well, that is the equivalent of working to solve a problem or to complete a task. And that in the computer science world is what we call an algorithm. An algorithm are steps you take to solve the problem. So our problem is, or our task is to set the table. Now, when we say that, those of us that are adults, we are immediately doing that in our brains. The kids may take a little bit longer with that, but they'll get there, right? So immediately you may have to walk them through what is step 1, what is step 2, what is step 3. Well, what the cool part about this is if you do it every day, you start to write down those steps, you begin to really get a precision on that algorithm. Well, when you do that, that's no different than the precision of the algorithm that's written for Facebook or Instagram that's then automated. So you can think about this, like once you figure out how to set the table, it becomes automated in your brain and you know that task and how to complete that task very quickly. So then let's transfer that to what if you want to tell a robot how to do it? You totally could, because you've already written the code in your brain to tell the human. Now you just want to tell the robot how to do it.
That's so fascinating to me. I love it. So I'm learning, right, the idea of taking a task, breaking it down into steps is an algorithm. And then repetition of that algorithm is, that means it's becoming automated. And
Yes.
my brain, of course, is just shifting to literacy work, all the work that we do. And so even just going through, so I'm basically saying that setting the table is writing. You're writing in the air. Basically, you're going through, you're using words like, first we need the plates, then we need the glasses, then we need that first, next, left, and just out loud. Using that auditory language is going to practice and become automated, so that when you do get to pen and paper, you're going to retrieve those words that you used in kind of like an everyday task. And also you'll be able to picture it. You'll be able to remember and plan out step 1, step 2, step 3. So I'm seeing so many different connections.
And would you say that even if you're not like physically, like for the younger children, even if they draw the pictures out, that is very relevant as well?
Huge. I would say a couple of things. My brain is going into kind of modification mode, right? I think some kids could act out, right, which they physically are doing to get the task done, right? I'm getting the plate, I'm getting the silverware. I think kids could sketch it. And perhaps the key to this example that we're giving is giving kids, if there are 5 steps to setting the table, giving them 5 pieces of paper so that they're sketching each step on its own piece of paper. Because what we don't want to happen is shortchange the step, right? Scrunch them all up into one little space. So, step 1 gets its own page, step 2, step 3. And then sometimes if kids are working on their illustration or their sketching work, you could also collage or even take photographs of the kids doing, right? And so that could be interesting too, you could make, I really do like pen to paper work, but for kids who might want to see their book on like a digital screen, you could just take a picture and import it. And then kids could annotate those images and then write like a sentence or 2 describing what each step was. So I think you could collage, take photo, create it digitally, or sketch or act out. All of those are rehearsal strategies and help writing stay really focused and planned and are fun, I would think.
Yeah, and it also leads me to think too, you mentioned a bit about the vocabulary that the students are practicing and using. And when you would come, so if you were a teacher, I said, okay, everybody, I'd like for you to write down how you set the table tonight, right? That conversation could be had the next day as a conversation between 2 students. And again, figuring out what are things that they find in common, what are they things that they find different, and then maybe coming up with just one solution between the 2 of them of how a general conversation about how to set the table. That process of having to decode and abstract out pieces that maybe aren't necessary, and then bringing back a general algorithm of how to set the table. Because everybody's going to do it a little bit differently, but if we can come up with a general synopsis, then that even can make it quicker for you to set, or just in general, that gives you that overview of what it means to set the table.
This could be a really interesting inquiry as I listen to it, right? The idea of, I think inquiry-based teaching is so important, right? Kind of posing this task or something we want to figure out, and then letting everybody do it kind of individually, coming back and sharing in partners or groups or even a whole group, and then like heading back out to do it again. I mean, we're doing this all around setting the table, but could you imagine, there's anything you could creating, having a dog walking service or a lemonade stand, like there could be some really interesting inquiry work around engaging tasks or experiences. And I'm just seeing the literacy work and the STEM and STEAM work, in these like everyday life experiences.
Well, you're applying the scientific method in some capacity. I mean, it's not exactly perfect, but you're doing an experiment, right? How did someone do it this way? And then you come back and you look at it, and then you try again, and then maybe you come back and see if you get similar capacities. The way I can equate this to is in my work in technology, I do a lot of data analysis, and people will ask for particular questions or things they think they want. So we'll go away and we may bring back some numbers, but then we always have to come back to the customer or the client and say, is this what you're looking for? Well, then there'll be another iteration of, well, that's not really what we were thinking. So then we've got to walk away and do it again and then come back. It's this process, an iterative process, which is also called a loop in computer science, where you're processing it, and maybe you do it once or twice and evaluating as you go along. And that's very natural in any career that we go into. So understanding that process, and then in the meantime, being able to physically write that down and communicate, to me, is at the core of what we want our students to be able to do as very literate individuals.
I think there is a loop in both reading and writing as well. So as I listen to you describe what the loop is, when we read fiction per se, I'll give you a fiction example, and you get to know a character in the beginning of a book, but you study their patterns, something changes in their pattern, you perhaps have to revise your initial theory about the character, and you kind of do that constantly.
Yep.
And all of those together is what you kind of helps you think about big ideas or interpreting themes in books that we read. And those are patterns as well too. And I think you could do that same thing work in nonfiction too. You read a book on sharks, you read 5 different books on sharks, they're all going to have different perspectives. You've got to go through and think about, what's the information the author giving me, and how can I take it in through their perspective, understanding it's their perspective, and some information will be biased and left out. And then I've got to do my work of putting it all together, synthesizing it all together. And then in writing, I feel like the loop is revision, like naturally revision.
Oh,
like,
yes.
We get ideas down in our notebook and we want to say, how do we say this sentence 7 times? We write it differently. And so revision sometimes accidentally gets confused with mechanics and editing. But the way I like to think of revision is really there are no mistakes, just smart change. You're changing your writing to fit a certain audience, right?
Well, and as you read it through, your initial thought may not make sense anymore.
Right.
You may have had initial vision, and then as you started writing it through, you're like, oh, wait a minute, that don't work out. That doesn't make sense anymore. And that's all the same thing happening when you're developing anything, stories, technology, scientific experiment. You may have one idea in the beginning, and then towards the end, you're like, ooh, that wasn't anything what I thought it was going to be.
And so now I have a word for that. It's looping, right? Am I saying it correctly?
The iterative process. And when you're thinking through and changes, and with our students, I tell my own children this a lot, because sometimes they'll do it one time and then they get frustrated if I say, well, it's okay, let's just try it again, because the first time may not be exactly what you thought it was going to turn out. Like even just the other day, my son was told to draw a picture of a body, and his original body looked very different than when she finished and saying, oh, our head should be such and such size. And remember, our brain is so big. It was really cool to watch him walk through that process. So part of what to recap this piece is to think about, as we are navigating the virtual learning, we want to think about the students are going to be with us for a short amount of time, because online learning is different than face-to-face. When they walk away from us, we want to give them some tools that they can use in their everyday action, like setting the table, walking the dog, feeding the dog, emptying the dishwasher, making your bed, even if it's getting up in the morning and writing down the process you do in the morning to get ready for virtual learning. It's different. It's different at my house than it was when we were going to a physical school. And then finding how you're using those patterns and that reading and writing every day, and how they can see that becomes back relevant when they're reading a novel or reading some text based on curriculum within their grade level.
And I'm listening as a fellow parent too, and I'm thinking about all the caregivers out there, or even teachers watching this, wanting to, offer support to caregivers of families of students that you're working with. And I think our encouragement is that having everyday life experiences is full of opportunities for academics, right? And we don't have to kind of name them in this way, but just in a few minutes, if we rattled off a bunch of kind of everyday life, like what you just said, like setting the table, making your bed. All of these things have a process in it, and it's absolutely supporting your writing, basically through your actions. And when you write, there's a reciprocity with reading, because you can take in a procedural text, you can take in a how-to. Life in general is full of processes. And then all of the work around automaticity and algorithm and looping that we're learning in STEAM and STEM, it just feels like it's fantastic. And so sometimes I think caregivers are nervous, but I'm not homeschooling, and I don't think you have to homeschool. I think the message that Sharon and I are sending is there's a lot of opportunity for at-home learning, both now and beyond, always.
Absolutely. And just supporting your child, or if you don't have your own child, or supporting your own students, whatever that looks like, by saying, you are still learning and doing, even though you may not be in my classroom. You may not be sitting in front of me at a desk, but we still can apply all of the content that we're learning when we walk away from this interaction online. So our challenge to you is find that one at-home activity and see what the kids come back with. I mean, you'll be amazed at and listen, if you've got Post-it notes, the Post-it note queen, Renee, would be thrilled for you to share that information. If you don't have a Post-it note, you can have them color a piece of paper and cut it out, or construction paper. We have lots of Post-it notes at my house too, because I enjoy a good Post-it, but we challenge you and send back to us what you have done. What other activities are we missing that are really relevant with your students?
I was saying cheers to my Post-its.
Cheers to those Post-its. I love them. Well, thank you everyone for joining us on this episode of Read, Write, Think, and Code with Renee and Sharon. And we can't wait to see you on the next episode.